On today's episode, featuring former vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party Spike Cohen, we hear takes on why Elon Musk buying Twitter hurts the thriving of humans. See the ATF honor the legacy of burning down buildings with innocent women and children inside. Look at how Trump apparently didn't spend trillions of taxpayer dollars through the bills that he signed. Analyze how more jobs is not a good thing for an area. Listen to someone say wanting to cut the IRS makes you pro-Putin. And lastly, find out why learning from Canada means that we should ban all guns. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we go through our feeds and we look for the cringiest political and cultural takes. We break down where they went wrong, try to challenge the underlying assumptions, and hopefully have a laugh along the way. Today, we are thrilled to have our guest, who is the chair of You Are the Power, was the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party in 2020, and of course, also known as Tasha's husband, Spike Cohen. Thanks so much for joining us, and if you want to give a shout out to any of your projects right now, please do that.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for reminding me of the meme that never ends. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thanks for having me on the show. You Are the Power is an organization I'm starting to help provide an outlet for people who want to do libertarian activism now, instead of waiting for the day when libertarians take over government. And we are doing localized single-issue activism in our communities and nearby communities, or remotely to other communities where we can help there. And it's basically a network of grassroots activists who want to do the real work to liberate our communities and show people how libertarianism works. And that's really the goal of You Are the Power. If you want to find out more, if you want to be among the first to find out when we officially launch, if you go to spikecohen.com, there's a form you can fill out, and you can become among the first to join You Are the Power.
So, sounds to me like what you're going to want to do today is go to spikecohen.com, sign up for that, and then right after you do that, go to cringeposts.com so that you can follow these posts visually if you're not watching our YouTube or Odyssey channel. And before we get into other people's cringy posts, we of course like to go over our own cringy posts or memories, because we don't like throwing stones from glass houses, as we are fond to say. So, Spike, if you want to recall a time that you've been talking about that made you cringe, let's you've got a pretty good story, so let's hear it.
Yes, this is better than a cringy post. This is a cringy speech and Q&A session that went on for the better part of an hour. So I very often speak at libertarian conventions, and there are many weekends where multiple states have their conventions. So this week, this was actually the last weekend. This is a fresh one. I was actually in Texas at the Texas State Libertarian Convention, but I also zoomed into 3 other libertarian conventions. What was it? Nebraska, Montana, and Utah. And so I'm giving one of my speeches, and I'm telling, because I always try to relate to the people that are there, talk about a fond memory I have of when I was in their state. So I welcomed, or I thanked the Utah Libertarian Party for having me speak at their convention, and talked about how much fun I had the last time I was there during the campaign on the bus tour. And Tasha and I had a great time in Salt Lake City, and got to see the beautiful Purple Mountains majesty at sundown, when the glow over the mountains, and what a beautiful place. And then started talking, giving my speech, and I kept referencing Utah and all the things that are going on in Utah. And then I started doing Q&A after that, about 20-minute speech, and took a couple questions and kept talking about Utah. And then finally someone said, Spike, I need to be the one to tell you, this is the Montana Libertarian Party. This was about 45 minutes into my hour-long speech, where I didn't just say Utah and then moved along. I kept, to make it personal, to make it where I showed them that I really knew and cared about where I was speaking into, I kept referencing a completely different state. So then I had to spend the next 15 minutes telling them how Utah was nothing compared to Montana. And anyone who tries to say that Utah even holds a candle to Montana is a prick, and it should be completely ignored. And so that they took it way better than I would have. and they took it very well, and they still do. Said, we love you, we understand. And I told them, it's the next one after it. I thought this was Utah, and so that is, I cringe as I'm talking about it.
That's like getting someone's name wrong in a conversation. You spend
For
a couple
an hour.
hours with them, except you
Yeah.
did it at a state level though. So
Yes, to multiple people. So like, if you told me your names were Britt and Donald, and there were a couple other people, and I misnamed all of you repeatedly, and then you had to tell me what your names were, and I was like, oh, I thought I was talking to Brett and Dan. So that's, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But they were gracious about it.
Well, I'm a little disappointed you told this story, because now you've taken all the wind out of my sails. I was going to write a big drama piece for, some libertarian infighting about how Spike doesn't value the great state of Montana. I was really going to stir the pot there, but now you seem to just own up to it. So now I can't use that.
No, now there's no scandal there, because now I've said that I completely. Yeah. And to be fair, Montana's one of the few states I haven't gone to. So what I would have opened with was saying, hey guys, get me out there, because I can't wait to visit Montana. Every time, which this is what I spent the last 15 minutes doing, is saying, I keep being told how it's like the most beautiful state, and I've yet to ever go there, not just for, anything related to libertarianism, but I've never been there. I can't wait to go. Please bring me out. And they're like, yeah, we can't wait to bring you out and have you misname our state.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll move into some of our other cringe posts here. So we got two here that we're going to feature sort of in the same topic here. So if when we're recording this, Elon Musk just made an offer to buy out Twitter for $54.20 a share. Of course, you have to have that perfect 420 number included in there. So based Elon continues to meme even in his purchases of corporations. And so he tweets out, I made an offer, and links to the SEC link of his offer. And Roseanne Arquette, which I could be mispronouncing, and I apologize if that's the case. She has a podcast and is sort of an online personality. Responds saying, what if you actually took that money and helped human beings thrive? And our second cringe post here comes from a repeat feature on this show, Brooklyn Dad Defiant, who tweets, if I had 43 billion, which is the cost of the purchase for the record, if I had 43 billion, I wouldn't be trying to buy free speech, but I definitely would be paying my fair share of taxes. And a reply to that which says, he could just create his own free speech platform and leave Twitter alone. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'll just give a brief overview and then hand it to you, Spike, to comment. But the first thing that I want to that makes me laugh is, one, if you actually took that money and helped human beings thrive. Of course, there's no mention of the fact that Elon Musk has created more value in like 1 month of his life than probably any of us can create, at least in a fiscal sense, in a year. He provides so much value to people through employment. He provides it in products and services, in innovation. All of these things help human beings thrive. And I think it's really funny that that's the language that she chooses to use, is thriving, because more than anything else, I feel like free market exchange, and in particular innovators who disrupt, like Elon Musk, have pushed the boundaries of what humans can do to thrive. In particular, that word thrive, I feel like is associated with that kind of progress moving forward. So that particularly made me laugh. But if you want to chime in on any of these wonderful takes.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is just one smart thing after the next. I will tell you, the thing with Elon Musk is that, and this is true of a lot of entrepreneurs, and especially the most successful ones, is that they're very big. They're first principles people, right? They look at something and they say, okay, there are clearly a lot of assumptions in this, whatever this market or sector is that I want to disrupt. What are the things we can put aside? Like, what, for example, what is a car? What do we need out of a car? What are the purposes of a car, and how can we do that better? Putting aside the last 100+ years of all the presumptions that have been built in, what can we remove? What can we change? Stripping it away to the basics of what do we need to do with a vehicle, and how can we do that better? And that's really, I mean, Jeff Bezos did that with Amazon. Elon Musk did that with Tesla. Bill Gates did that with Microsoft. Al Gore did that with the internet. Like this is how innovators create value, is by looking at things that already have all of this institutional knowledge, but also institutional misknowledge or malknowledge that's built in, and strip that away and look for what we really need, what we don't need, and what we can change and innovate with. And that's why he's a multi-billionaire. The take about the taxes, he paid, what did he pay, $21 billion in taxes. And as he mentioned to, I forget if it was Bernie Sanders or I think it was Liz Warren, but one of them, he said, if you were to take every bit of money that I had, it would fund the government for like a couple days or something like that, like, or a few days.
Mhm.
So it was like, that's not the problem, is that I have this money that I earned from, creating value and making wealth. And interestingly enough, the people that will, be upset about the wealth gap, or, the fact that it's hard for, poorer people to try to, as they put it, thrive and things like that. These are the same people that will fight tooth and nail to defend things like occupational licensing laws, or any of the myriad other overly burdensome regulations that drive up the cost of living, the cost of entering various markets as an entrepreneur, and basically forcing you to work for someone else, or to run up 5 or 6 figures in student loan debt to be able to be allowed to engage in a profession that you probably already, in many cases, already knew how to do. They have no problem with that. That's the real things that are holding people back from thriving, not Elon Musk, creating entire new sectors and industries and disrupting existing ones.
Yeah, the kind of something we commonly say on this show is like when we see takes like this is that most of the great wealth and great big businesses that have been made and built by making things cheaper for people, not more expensive, right?
Yeah.
And uh especially when you think about like a Tesla, right? And it's like you can get an electric car for $30,000 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and sure, there's probably some ancillary stuff with how the government's funded, Musk in different ways and subsidized him. But regardless,
Oh
like
yeah.
he has
Yeah. He's
made
got his tax breaks.
electrical tech, yeah. But he's made electrical technology so cheap, right, that the normal person can afford to buy an electric car that's really well made and really well done. And that's pretty amazing, right? Like I can go spend, $20,000 and have my roof tiled with solar panels, and that's because of his innovation and everything. So, in terms of like Roseanne's comment on it, it's like Elon Musk with just one of his companies has generated exponentially more, millions of times more value than one person can generally create in their whole lifetime. And he's made everyone's lives better from that. And you can't even calculate all of it, right? Because it's not only just the direct, employment and then the direct consumers that are benefiting from it, but it's also all of the, businesses that are able to exist because he's created that value, right? The people that install the solar panels, the people that supply all the different
Exactly.
types of materials and resources from it. So anytime you create something that's valuable, like it has a mass multiplier effect across the board, and you can't even calculate it, right? And that's so it's pretty funny that she chooses the word thrive, like you're saying, Donnie.
The
Absolutely.
last little comment here that's so funny too, if we will maybe each chime in on this and then we'll move to the next post, but he should just create his own free speech platform and leave Twitter alone. And it's like, what do you think Twitter like started as? Do you think
Yeah.
Twitter started as this thing where it gradually sort of became this creep, especially with the new CEO after Dorsey left, and him outright saying things like, we don't feel the need to make it a free speech platform anymore, blah blah blah. But that's an evolution, that's not its origin. And it makes me think of that, it's sort of an adage, sort of a meme about how I've seen it more shared from conservative circles. So I think they usually say conservatives build things, and then lefty types take them over and then force out the conservatives and say, just go build your own new thing. And it's
Right.
this ever repeating cycle. So then the conservative builds the new thing, and then the liberals take it over. And again, I don't really think it's in a sort of a right left paradigm. I think it's usually more sort of the up down paradigm, right? Like the innovators, the people who aren't constrained by whatever government rules or the way that systems currently are, the sort of the outliers there build something. And then the woke scolds come in and say, no, you have to make it kowtow to what we think it needs to be in line. We need to put all these regulations and rules on it. So it's just really funny to see this cycle playing out again with Twitter. And now that someone who actually has the means and at least allegedly, purportedly, the ideology of freeing something up, being able to take back an institution that's been creeping that way, they're losing their minds, it seems.
Yeah. So, or you have the situation where they become the woke scold. So, like Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Jeff Bezos, for that matter. They started as very anti-authoritarian disruptors in their various sectors, and they were, and especially with the social media ones, with Zuckerberg and Dorsey, to completely disrupt things and to allow for this new platform where people could freely share different ideas. Twitter, especially, I mean, that was the preferred platform for dissident journalists and the people that were trying to get the message out, freedom fighters and things like that. And slowly over time, it's become, well, unless you disagree with the American election results or the German election results. Very interestingly, shortly after Twitter announced that they were going to start limiting what you could say about apparently the German federal election results a few months ago, I got an email notice. I actually posted it on Facebook and I think on Twitter as well, letting me know that I had been reported for violating German law about questioning the German election results. But that thankfully they had determined that I had not violated their policy on it, which is good because I've never, I don't believe ever commented on one way or another about the German federal elections because I know absolutely nothing about them. But yet somehow I was still reported for violating that rule. And so that can happen as well. And if Elon wants to buy it and take it back to the free speech roots, then so be it. It's also interesting, the idea of leave Twitter alone. Well, Twitter is publicly traded, so anyone can buy it. Anyone can buy shares of it. Anyone can become a member of the board. It's not. It doesn't actually belong to that person who's saying that, unless they own whatever shares they own. That's to whatever extent they own it. If he's allowed to purchase it, then it will be his, and then he can. Then you'll have to leave Twitter alone if you don't like it.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Britt, or else we can move on.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to our next cringe post here. And this one is inspired directly from you, Spike. If you guys aren't following Spike on Facebook, you absolutely need to. If you still are on Facebook, which I realize is a reach for some. But Spike's comments in particular on the ATF's pages, as well as a bunch of other great organizations, they are just chef's kiss. It's so much fun whenever I get that little notification that says Spike Cohen has commented. You gotta scroll down. You gotta read. You're in for a good time. So in honor of that, I thought I'd go to the ATF Facebook page and pull a post of theirs. So the ATF official Facebook page posts, on this day 29 years ago, ATF special agents Conway LeBleu, Todd McKeon, Robert Williams, and Steve Willis were killed in the line of duty attempting to serve a search warrant at the Branch Davidian compound outside of Waco, Texas. ATF personnel from the Houston Field Division laid a wreath this morning at the Waco Peace Officer Memorial in Texas in honor of our fallen brothers. Today and every day, ATF honors and remembers these agents and their families. #ATF 50. And I don't want to come across as glib or sort of, dancing on their literal graves. That's not the angle I want to come out here. But it seems so wrong and backwards for the ATF to be posting about fallen officers in the incident where they burned a building with women and children to the ground inside. Like that seems in a little bit more poor taste than you calling them out for this post, right?
Yeah, this would be like a memorial in Poland to commemorate the brave German authorities who lost their lives to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Like it is absurd. To put this in perspective, they're talking about the 4 agents that died in Waco. What they're not talking about is the over 100, I think it's around 150 or something like that, innocent men, women, and children, dozens of children, some as young as newborns, who were set on fire in their home in Waco and machine gunned. Any of them who tried to escape being burned to death were gunned down by the ATF and FBI trying to escape their fiery grave. And for those who say, but David Koresh didn't surrender and they fought back and so forth. So David Koresh, multiple times before they decided to go to the compound, David Koresh would routinely leave and go to town to go shopping. He'd go on his motorcycle. They could have easily picked him up multiple times if they had wanted to, but they didn't want to. The reason they did this, and we know this now, there have been at least 2 documentaries, one that happened in the 90s and one that's happened more recently on Netflix, that detail how the ATF were worried about budget cuts that were happening under the Clinton administration, and they needed to make sure that they got budget increases, and so they had to create a boogeyman. And that boogeyman was David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. Now, some of the allegations were true, some of the allegations were not true, but at no point did anything that David Koresh may or may not have been doing justify murdering everyone. And including literally dozens of children, especially when, again, they could have easily grabbed him any other time. And many of the claims that they made about machine gun fire was happening, none of that was ever substantiated. The claims that David Shipman, who almost became our next ATF director last year, that he made, or 2 years ago that he made, no, last year, claims he made that they were shooting helicopters with 50 caliber machine guns, and none of that was true. And this was a very powerful lesson in 2 things. One is that if a government agency needs money, they will murder as many people as they have to try to justify their need for that money. And 2, if they can convince, because back then the American people overwhelmingly believed that these people needed to die because they were told that they were religious wackos. The second thing is, it is very easy to convince people that if someone's crazy or dangerous, that they all just need to die. And that's my takeaway from that. The ATF it goes without saying that the ATF is really good at murdering innocent people, putting people away for exercising their constitutionally affirmed right to keep and bear arms, and arming violent Mexican drug cartels.
And trying to gaslight the American people about why they do it.
Yes.
Just to cap it off. Sorry, Brett.
Yes, just to cap it off, yes.
Yeah, and even if we were to everything you said, I totally agree with. And but if we were to steel man this post, right, and be like, okay, 4 men died, and maybe they had families and stuff, and that's really sad. I kind of adhere to Colonel Douglas McGregor's thing about well, if you care about the soldiers so much, then bring them home. So if you care about these guys' lives so much, how about you abolish the ATF and never put anyone in this position ever again? Right. Yep. Both for the sake of the folks that were in the compound, as well as, the ATF agents who may or may not have good intentions. Let's just not put them in that position. Maybe we shouldn't have this organization at all in the first place. Really, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, 2 of those things are totally legal now. Who cares?
Yep, exactly.
Your job is basically irrelevant, and we don't need you. But like you were saying, they will justify any amount of bodies or acts to keep their funding,
including their own agents.
It's interesting to. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying,
including their own agents.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this highlights to me, especially when you bring up that sort of the motivation behind it being these budget cuts, right? And so when it comes to topics like this, or topics like war, or topics like even the things like the drug war, I think it's really easy to display the human harms that happen, right? But it's harder sometimes when we're trying to convince, sort of free market ideas of, either you're trying to abolish government or at least trying to make it smaller. That's a little bit harder to sort of convince people, because they're like, well, without a big government, we won't be able to help people. But then it's you can look at examples like this, and it's look, even the most minute detail, which is a budget system in the government, which makes it so that you don't get to keep money unless you spend it. Something that's already fiscally irresponsible then translates into something that, because the government is the only, quote unquote, legitimate monopoly on violence, becomes violent in the way that it gets carried out, right? Yep. You don't get, there's not a separation in the government's, sort of budgeting and day-to-day sort of, pushing paperwork and actual real world violent murder. Yep. Those things are directly connected because of the corrupt entity. And that's what conservatives, in my estimation, get so wrong, is they feel that the government is only corrupt in certain cases, only certain areas. Yep. And it's no, it's the heart of the thing. If something as minute as budget structuring can cause hundreds of people to get killed in a burning building, including women and children, there's probably something innately flawed with that institution.
Yeah, government is so corrupt, thieving, and downright violent and untrustworthy that it should only be trusted to run the very infrastructure of our civil society.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
It should be reserved just for the stuff that we absolutely need to have a functioning society, because we can't trust them at any time. So we should give them that.
Well, and that's why I believe in nationalizing the food and the oxygen and the water industries. You know,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that would be a really good step.
Yes. Yes. Especially because
Gonna go down to the.
I like with progressives, because that's kind of the conservative take. The progressive take is, I am sick of government working so closely and in a way being owned. It's hard to tell whether it's government that owns the corporations or corporations that own the government, because they're so intertwined with big money and big government, driving up the cost of things just to enrich the crony billionaires. So we need to give them all the power and money to fix that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
a good
right
point.
along the lines of, guns are dangerous and the cops are racist, so let's only give the racist cops the guns.
Only give the
It's kind
racist
of
guns.
circular logic.
That's intuitive. That makes sense.
It just goes to follow.
Yes.
Okay. So the next post we're going to look at here, and while he's not verified, this is not the cringe post. It's a reply to his that is the cringe post. I'm going to give him a shout out. Twitter provocateur Drew Hancock, who has made some good YouTube content and tweets out in all the libertarian shenanigans. He tweets out, "The current inflation is Trump's fault. Whenever inflation is 35% under the next president, that'll be Biden's fault." To which someone replies, "Oh, Trump passed trillions and massive spending bills when he was in office? Think I missed that part." To which I have to say, yes, it's the Scandinavian man looking to the side. Yes,
Yes. You did miss
this is
that
not.
part.
We don't even need.
Easy. You did. You missed that part. Yes, that happened.
We don't even need to go super deep in this. We'll take a crack at it. But it just made me laugh because it's like, this is the maybe all of Elon Musk's critics are right about Twitter shouldn't be free because you can just amplify any voice.
People are going to
this
say
person
stuff
felt
like
they need
this.
to amplify their voice.
We can't let people
exactly.
say things like this. Yeah.
We can't let people say things like this. Only the government, who routinely lies to us and gaslights us.
No, we can't have
but
free market private gaslighting. We have to have just government gaslighting.
Yeah. So this one just made me laugh because, it's kind of a sad reality where everyone wants to. I mean, I think the first thing that's funny is that everyone points to the president as though it is the specific president, and I'm not even lighting up Drew for this. I think it's in his tweet, it's more of shorthand for the administration and policies and things like that. But I think in the public discourse and vernacular, people point to the president as though the only factor is who gets elected. If there's an R or a D by their name, that it determines if the economy is good or bad. And so then this person's talking about, oh, Trump passed trillions in massive spending. No, he actually didn't. He signed the bills that did that. And he it's like, it's almost worse. It's like, you could, sometimes you can look at a congressman and they're like, look, my hands were tied. My election's coming up. My constituents wanted, good parts of things they put in this bill, and they put a whole lot of bad. And I don't think that's justifiable, but it's understandable. Trump, on the other hand, has the final say. The president is the ultimate person to say, no, we're not going to inflate our currency like this, at least in these specific cases. And he just signed it because he wanted, Trump bucks, and he wanted his name going out on every letter that, went out to people with those stimulus payments. I believe they actually got delayed, if I'm not mistaken, because he wanted his name on things that went out, and so they had to put extra time. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And again, yes, this person missed that part. I actually during the campaign, I had someone reach out to me. I forget where it was, on either Facebook or Twitter or whatever. One of the rare times I was on social media during the campaign. And I was talking about the deficit, and the newest numbers had come out, and I said we are looking at a record deficit for a single term, and it ended up being, it broke every conceivable previous record for a single for amount of new debt being created under a single presidential term. And this person said, "You're a liar. Donald Trump has reduced the debt." And I said, "No, that's
oh my
verifiably false. Where are you getting this?" And they shared a link to a YouTube video of when Donald Trump was campaigning in like 2015 or 2016, saying that he would reduce the debt. And I said, yes, he did lie. I'm not disputing that he said that he was going to do that. But then I gave them a link to the chart and the graph showing that no, he's run up. At that point, it was well over 5 trillion, and it ended up being about 7 trillion in debt that was created in 4 years. A good bit of it just in the last year, and he was just literally signing whatever he could, hoping it would get him reelected. And we're now dealing with the inflationary consequences largely of that. Drew is 100% on point. I don't know if it'll be 35%, but it'll be very, very high. And that will be because of the spending that's happening now under Biden. So, I mean, that it tracks 100%. And this just shows the tribalism, because you could just as easily do it the flip side. When Trump was president and things were bad, you could say, well, this was actually because of something that happened under Obama. But when it gets worse in 4 years, it'll be because of Trump continuing and expanding it. And some Democrat going, oh, Obama was bombing children with drones? I must have missed that part. Well, yes, you did.
Yeah, it really shows like the time preference of Americans in terms of like their ability to see, because like it's history started when the thing happened, right? So it's like history started on September 11th, and history started when Ukraine was invaded. Everything before that doesn't matter. Everything after this does. And it's like no, like the reason we are here today is literally because every president promises to reduce the deficit or says we're going to get ourselves out of it, and none of them ever do. Like that's one of the most consistent things you can probably count on, is that they're going to spend a bunch of money after they're elected, and it's going to be record amounts of money.
Exactly.
So it's funny to me, and we dunk on both Trump and Biden and everyone in between, because we're principle based, right? We're not power based. We have a principle we fall back on, and we're not trying to it's not okay for us to spend money when we're in power, because it's spending other people's money, right? That's the principle we fall back on. But these people, the only thing that matters to them is power, and that's why you have this type of tribalism.
Yep, exactly.
Well, and the last thing that I'll read into this one is that if you haven't read think about him what you will. An interesting book is Democracy: The God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, and one of the things he talks about in that book is how he's not a monarchist. To be clear, a lot of people sort of strawman him as to say he's a monarchist. He's not, but he goes through and shows how monarchy in many cases is preferable to democracy. And one of the cases he gives, I think, is demonstrated by this, where these 4-year election cycles of presidents really gives there to be no long-term consequences for someone, even if they are reelected once. They only maximum have 8 years, and then they can burn the fields, as it were. They can destroy the land. They can go to war. They can do all these things that are harmful to the economy, because after those 8 years, they're out. They're gone. They have a guaranteed pension. They don't have a legacy to preserve. And at least in the case of monarchy, you're thinking about your future children, your heirs, your legacy, those kinds of things. You have a longer time preference for making sure that you're going to, preserve things and not burn, print 17 gajillion dollars to make inflation rise by an infinite percent, because you don't want to do that to your kids. Now again, monarchy's not perfect, and I don't think that's his conclusion either, but it's one of these things where we're always sold that democracy is this perfect, beautiful, nothing can go wrong system. And then we have cases like this where it's very clearly Trump burned the ground in order to try to get reelected. And we see the unfortunate consequences of that. And he's not really suffering for it, right? The everyday person is. He's wealthy enough that this inflation, it hurts him, but it doesn't hurt him proportionally at all as it does, the middle class and the lower classes.
So I do want to say, when it comes to monarchy, obviously, you're at the mercy of if this person is or isn't a madman, which in the case of monarchy, there's a lot of inbreeding, so the odds of them being a madman are even higher, or a mad woman. But even if they're not, there's also the problem of the reality that they can't possibly have all of the inputs needed to know what everyone needs. So maybe in a very small setting, I know often they'll use like Liechtenstein or something like that as an example. Maybe in a certain situation where it's basically a large landowner who is deciding what his private property that other people are deciding to, be essentially glorified tenants on. Maybe that could work out, although there's still a lack of feedback mechanism if there are some real problems. But yeah, I mean, monarchy, anytime you have too much power in the hands of too few people, including one person, that can certainly create problems. The problem with democracy, I think one of the biggest problems is that it pretends to be what we actually want, which is decentralization. It is not decentralization. Decentralization is
That's a
what we
great
want.
point.
We want people to have their individual autonomy and power over themselves and their bodies and their labor and their property, and to be able to work voluntarily with others and form coalitions and organizations and everything, and businesses and charities and co-ops and mutual aid societies, whatever else, in a voluntary manner, and defending themselves in a network of mutual defense against anyone who would try to impose upon them. Democracy is still having that authoritarian, system, but allowing the majority to decide who runs it. Well, that in here, I mean, we talk about minority rights. Well, that's out the window, because what matters is the majority, who to appeal to the majority. But what it also does is it also almost always leads to this false binary choice that people line up to fight to form factions. People that would have otherwise agreed with each other form factions to fight over who is in control of these different levers of power. There is this constant scorched earth strategy of, if I don't get in, I'm gonna wreck burn every bridge and poison every well and salt every bit of earth in order to make sure that it's harder for the person that replaces me. And it's just unnecessary adversarialism in order to grab positions of power where people could have otherwise tried to work together and find consensus, or choose not to freely associate. And you have to go no further than the Libertarian Party to see that on a regular basis.
Yes.
Or America.
Ouch. Do you have any thoughts on this, Britt, or are we good to move on?
I'm good. Let's go.
Okay. So this next post is a comment in reply to an article that was talking about a bill that got partially vetoed in Washington State. Now, Spike, if for your convenience, you may refer to this the whole time as Oregon State. This is in fact Washington State, though, just to be clear. But this bill essentially would have been tax cuts for a bunch of different manufacturing industries, and it would have affected 36 of the 39 different counties in Washington State.
Okay.
So, it's not like, I don't love legislation, and generally the more legislation you veto, the better. However, this is one of those cases where it's kind of like you're legislating a tax break, so you're almost legalizing freedom a little bit more. So
yeah.
it would have been more good than bad. And so this post happened in a Republican group on Facebook, and our governor here, Inslee, is one of the bluest in the country, and so the Republican page is smearing his veto, and this comment comes up saying they were talking about the lost job opportunities. So this comment reads, "Growth in jobs is not necessarily good. The businesses this bill is targeted to will bring in additional workers, most likely paying minimum wage to rural areas, which will compound traffic and housing affordability. If you want crime, traffic, and unaffordable housing, then move to Seattle. Keep rural areas rural." And I can't help but think that if this was the thought process of everyone, we would still be an primarily agrarian society that didn't have electricity developed. It's such a danger, and I think it also speaks, there are different pros and cons of arguments on the whole immigration debate, right? But I think one of the worst sort of things about the immigration debate is when people kind of bring in xenophobic vibes from it, right? I can understand closed borders for some people. I don't get it when it has to do with oh man, they're going to hurt our economy, when in that's sort of demonstrably false. And I think that's the tact that this comment makes here. They talk about how it's bring in a bunch of minimum wage workers and then disrupt traffic and housing affordability. And it's no, if you're bringing in workers and you're bringing in giving tax relief to businesses, that means that you're making goods cheaper, once again, like we talked about in the beginning, and you're actually allowing growth in that area, and you can expand. And I agree that there should be some difference in rural and urban in some ways. You should be able to have areas that are more rural, but I think growing them in these kinds of ways is healthy for everyone. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of ghost towns, unfortunately you've seen in the Midwest in a lot of places.
Yeah, move over, they took our jobs. Here comes, they brought us jobs. I'm not even sure what this person is angry about. So, also, nothing affects housing affordability like a bunch of people making minimum wage. That is who is driving up the cost of housing, folks. It's not BlackRock. working directly with the Federal Reserve to buy up land and property and jack up pricing and making it increasing. It's the minimum wage workers that are coming in. There is so much. This is like NIMBYism as a personality. This is like a step away from like Luddite talk. Like this is very, progress is bad, jobs are bad, growth is bad, everything is bad. I just want to be left alone. And keep rural areas rural means I don't want to meet anyone new. Like this is actually, I guess, kind of peak xenophobia, because it's not tied to like specific races or creeds or skin colors or ethnicities. It's just I don't want any more people. Like I don't like people. It's actually incredible. It's a bad take, but it's also fascinating to read.
If you put it that way, if you just put it as I don't like people, you're gonna really attract the millennial demographic there, Spike. So be careful. That's kind of a millennialism.
Yes.
I just don't like people.
I just don't like people. It's misanthropy as it's NIMBYism as a like if NIMBYism became a person, this person's name is NIMBY. I'm convinced of it, or NIMBY's their last name or something. That's incredible. I don't want no jobs in my backyard. That's awesome. That's a great take.
Yeah, and I thinking about this, because I can understand like a desire to like live in a place that looks beautiful or has less traffic or whatever, but I think this like really illustrates the problem with like the top-down management, because no one has a say in whether this happens or not, right? Like the governor has the say, and then some of the state legislator has a say. And so like we can't actually let this play out, right? We can't have one community let it happen and then another community in their boneheadedness not let it happen. And then see how the results play out, right? Because it's one size fits all for all 36 counties. And we can't actually compare, right? Like you were talking about earlier, Spike, like there's no feedback mechanism for people to actually see like, oh, things are so much better over there, we should do that here. So it just compounds the problem, because then this happens and then it doesn't work in some counties, right? Like for whatever one reason or another. And so then the other counties that might benefit actually from it are going to point to those counties and be like, well, it didn't work over there and this all happened, even though it doesn't necessarily apply, right? So no one's able to actually see through the fog of all the different market forces at place. And everything becomes worse and more ineffective and just terrible.
Well, and then the other aspect is to think about like how, this person doesn't directly make this argument, but the implication is that, growth in jobs isn't necessarily good. Keep rural areas rural. Therefore, I'm okay with the government robbing these industries of their, their income from taxes.
Yeah.
Like what a gross thing to say. Like it's not even like this is a bill that, the government would be giving money to, subsidizing these industries. It's, you could even say this is, in that case, well, this is a government that has an incentive to remove rural areas from being rural because it votes against its own interests. You could make some argument that way. I don't know how compelling it would be, but this is just saying, no, they shouldn't be allowed to keep more of their own money. They shouldn't be allowed to be more profitable for and retain the earnings that they've worked for.
Mm-hmm.
The government should have that because I don't like people. Yeah.
and the thing is, but the point of this is, and Britt, you mentioned this as well, if your local area, not just this one person, which is what I suspect, but their local area, their community, their city, their county, their whatever, they decided they wanted to keep out the jobs because it's going to bring in those minimum wage workers that are jacking up the pricing for all those new luxury apartments here. If they really wanted that, they could drive up the taxes where they are and the regulations and say no new jobs and do all of that in their backyard, and then let other places choose. But instead, this person, because they don't want to meet any new people in their area, they want to impose on their entire state these overly burdensome taxes. And of course, as we know, if you want to keep a place, you want to keep its quaint charm and its low crime rates and low traffic, you jack up all the prices and regulations. That makes everything great. Charming.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And so we'll move on to the next post. The last thing I do want to say, because it's not in the post, but just to get you listeners a little taste of the kind of person our governor is, he issued a partial veto. He kept some of it in place because he's trying to lure a high-tech clean energy business into Washington, and so he left the provision there that would apply to that. It's unnamed right now, but he leaves it for that. So the government will only ever do things like the, partial vetoes and then leave the part that is desirable for their intended outcome.
Yep.
Do not think the government is an unbiased actor. It absolutely has motive, and it's totally imbalanced. Okay. We're going to move on.
What time do we have you till?
You've got me for about another 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Awesome.
We should be good then.
Yep, we should be good. We'll be perfect here. So we got this genius level take, which the links an article that says, Senator Rick Scott proposed cutting the IRS budget in half. The agency's commissioner said, you might be better off and save more money by just shutting it down completely. And the comment attached with this article from the tweet is, pretty obvious the pro-Putin wing wants to cripple our government from the inside. So this is the Russia derangement syndrome, where everyone I don't like is a Russian. A children's, story or guide to argumentation. It's crazy to think that you can look at, look at someone saying, like, yeah, the IRS has caused harm, and we don't like what the IRS has done, and the government has hurt people, and think, wow, that's a pro-Putin apologist.
That's a pro-Putin take. Yeah, I'm just glad that the Democrats, who for a brief period of time were anti-war, and that was a fun time for all of us, have fully embraced their roots of embracing the military-industrial complex and red baiting anyone who tries to keep government under any kind of semblance of control or reduce costs, as supporting the Ruskies. It's incredible how all things, it's like there is no new thing under the sun. And this is a perfect example of that. Like, and certainly Republicans have done it as well. I'm seeing plenty of Republicans out there accusing anyone who doesn't support, a disastrous policy towards the Russia-Ukraine invasion of trying to provoke an air war, no-fly zone, which is an aerial combat zone. Let's be very clear what that would mean. Over Ukraine, who nothing says protecting the Ukrainian people like starting a nuclear air war over their skies, and labeling that as being weak on foreign policy. But the reality is, and we've seen this during the so-called the war on terror, the war on drugs. Anytime you want to try to cut something, someone is going to accuse you of trying to work with our enemies, because it evokes an emotional response, and it allows them to sidestep your criticism of what it is government is doing. So you couldn't be someone that thought that the Patriot Act was going too far and that it was robbing us of our civil liberties and our privacy. No. You supported the terrorists, not the CIA, who's actually funding and training the terrorists. You supported the terrorists for questioning that arrangement. And we're seeing that now, if you want to, and certainly no love lost with Senator Rick Scott. I'm sure we could spend a whole episode talking about his terrible takes on stuff. Of all the things I can muster to criticize Rick Scott about, it isn't his possibly tongue-in-cheek, or maybe it was a serious proposal, to cutting the IRS budget in half. I will say, I wish I was, I could have occupied Senator Rick Scott's body just long enough after the IRS the IRS commissioner said, you might as well just, shut our agency down, to respond by saying, yes, okay, that sounds good. If that would be better, then let's do that. Yeah.
Where's the paperwork? Where do I sign?
Yeah, we were always okay with that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna file the agency commissioner's statement. You might be better off and save more money if you shut it down under accidentally based, because that would have been awesome if that had happened.
That is an accidental good idea. Yes.
Yeah. We'll move on because this one's a little bit shorter, and I want to save some time for our next one. But the last thing I'll say is this is almost the reverse role of the debate moment from Ron Paul when they asked, nearly half of Americans don't pay any taxes. What do you think of that? And he goes, we're halfway there,
Yeah, halfway there.
And it's kind of the reverse situation here, where he says, let's cut it in half, and the guy's like, well, then just defund it completely. Yes, let's do
Not
that.
based.
Good idea.
You're
First
right.
good idea the IRS
Very
has
great.
had.
Very, 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 very based.
Very based. Okay, our last take comes from 3 tweets, 2 of which are our President Biden tweets. A felon or domestic abuser can go from kit to gun in as little as 30 minutes. Buyers aren't required to pass a background check, and because the guns have no serial numbers, when they show up at a crime scenes, they can't be traced. And yes, that typo is in the original. Last year alone, law enforcement reported approximately 20,000 suspected ghost guns to ATF. That's a tenfold increase from 2016. These guns are the weapon of choice for many criminals, and we're going to do everything we can to deprive them of that choice. And our final post here replies to that: ban guns outright, learn from Canada. And there's a lot to unpack here. My first introductory comment to this would be, if we learned anything from Canada, it's that if you have the gall to have a dissent from the elites, from the aristocrats and the government, from the working population, you should absolutely wish that you had the ability to print ghost guns, or else maybe your bank assets are going to get frozen and you're going to be chased off the streets in spite of a month-long protest that was an actual workers' rights protest. What we learned from Canada was not a good thing. Things we saw from Canada were priests being dragged from their places of worship because they refused to comply with COVID lockdowns. That's what we learned from Canada. So when Biden tells us that he wants to disarm us further and prevent us from being able to defend ourselves through these printed ghost guns, that's what we should learn from Canada. So in a sense, this one's somewhat accidentally based. If you just looked at the last half of the comment, ban guns outright, not so much. But learning from Canada, yes.
The last 3 words, very based. So remember, keep in mind, there is no such thing as a gun ban, okay? There is no banning guns. Guns aren't going away. What they are saying is, we want guns to be only in the hands of the very, very racist police officers that we said were very racist, or we established very, very racist, that only they should have guns. But what they're really saying is, we think that only the police officers should have guns, and people who don't care what the law is. That only the people who are the most likely to use those guns to commit offensive violence should in fact be allowed to have them, and the law-abiding non-government actors, who we have very little, if anything, to fear from, they should not be allowed to have guns. I also want to do a fact check, since the fact-checking groups will never do such a thing. When Joe Biden is saying that there's been a 4-fold increase and so forth in ghost guns, they have started including in their ghost gun numbers guns that there has been an attempt to file off the serial number. So, for example, I think his name is Frank James. He was the shooter in Brooklyn, who the subway shooter in Brooklyn a few days ago. They would qualify his gun as a ghost gun, and I actually have a photo of that gun. You can still read the serial number because at some point he tried probably with like a pen or something to take it off, to scratch it off before realizing that was a fruitless venture. That would be considered a ghost gun because there was an attempt to file the serial number. Those stats are completely ridiculous. Thankfully, thanks to 3D manufacturing, we are slowly approaching an era where it literally will not matter what the government thinks about gun ownership. If you want to have one, you will be able to, a ghost gun, a Tor node, and a VPN, you will be able to anonymously and safely produce a production quality, professional quality firearm. You can already go make one right now, but the quality is still getting there. But you will be able to make a professional level manufactured firearm from the safety and privacy of your own home, and it will not matter what the government thinks about that at all. And eventually, even further from that, we will reach a point where you will be able to safely and effectively manufacture weapons that are based on prototypes and designs that even the government doesn't have yet. So we're approaching a brave new era where it literally will not matter what the government thinks about gun ownership, and I fully welcome it.
That's exciting. That's awesome. We were talking, but Donnie and I were talking before the show and about Canada. And one of the things I learned a few days ago was that you can't, if you're not vaccinated, for one reason or another, you can't leave Canada currently. Yep. And then I think about that, and I think about obviously the trucker protests, and it's like, well, we learned from Canada that like if there's no threat that the citizenry will eventually not put up with what you're doing, like if there's no threat of like equal response and force, then they'll do whatever the heck they want to you. And then I think about Shanghai, right? All these videos I've seen coming out of people that have been literally locked in their homes or being dragged away violently. There was this one specific video I saw of, everyone literally on their decks screaming because they're either starving to death or they've been locked in their houses for weeks on end, because they're trying to do a zero COVID thing. That would never happen in most places here in the United States, simply because there's the threat of the hundreds of millions of guns that people own, because no one would tolerate that, right? Like, and the amount of insurgency that would occur because of that would just make it's not tenable. It's not a risk that our government's willing to take. And that's a good thing, right? Like, the government should have a healthy fear of its populace, because I want them, thinking a couple times about what they do, and checking over their shoulder, because, or else, as we've seen, right? Any government that doesn't have that type of potential threat on the other side of their actions, is gonna do whatever they want to you, and that is a very terrifying perspective. And like you were saying, these gun bans that they're doing, they're not bans on, like, it's not like you put up a sign and then when you walk across it, the gun vanishes right into thin air. The gun teleporter grabs it and detects it. It's the people that are in authority have them, and then the people that have less than good intentions of using them have them, and then the people that actually need them to defend themselves don't. And that's the main problem with that. There's no such thing as a gun ban. There's just selective hands that have guns.
Yeah.
Well, and then don't let the I would say the government and the useful idiots of the government gaslight you. When oftentimes when we bring up things about the government, there's all the compromises people try to make. Well, you shouldn't have a gun that's that dangerous. You shouldn't have a quote assault weapon or whatever. You don't need that for hunting or whatever. And it's like, guns and the right to self-defense, for one, doesn't need to be justified constitutionally for your right to self-defense to exist.
Exactly.
As the case may be, it is, fortunately for us, but it doesn't need to be. But even if you look at that constitutional provision, this was very much to put a check on the government. And what, to what I was saying about gaslighting, what they will do is the useful idiots or people maybe who just don't know better will say, well, what are you going to do against a tank? You really think you're going to survive against the government's nukes? And it's like, yeah, actually, if there's enough of us, yes. Kind of the meme about, Area 51, they can't stop us all. But to some degree, that is true. Now, it would be a horrible bloodbath, and we never want to get to that point. But just the reality that it is a possibility is a check. And I think that that's something that's worth considering. The other thing, when you're talking about the manufacturing of guns and the ability that one will have to do this from their own home, the worry I have there is that we're going to have the Republicans and the Democrats collude together to ban that, because the Democrats don't want you to defend yourself, and the Republicans will be mad because you'll be putting out some useful jobs. You'll be taking away manufacturing jobs, and they'll think that that's not good because, gosh, you can't you can't innovate to leave some people unemployed. The buggy whip lobby is very mad at us still, I think.
Yes, and the operators, the switch operators, they have been devastated.
Yes.
Yes. Exactly.
All right. Well, unless there's anything else you guys wanted to say, I think we can wrap up the show. So thank you, Spike, once again for coming onto our show. We were just thrilled to have you. It was a blast. Once again, if you want to pitch anything, we'll give you this chance right now. One last shout out.
Sure, absolutely. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. I'm on TikTok for the kids. And if you look up Spike Cohen, you'll find me. I am at Real Spike Cohen on Twitter and at literally Spike Cohen on pretty much everything else. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing with You Are the Power, which is going to be launching any day now, and also if you want to keep up with any events that I'm doing possibly in your area, go to spikecohen.com and you can fill out our form to be notified when You Are the Power goes live. And also you can see the upcoming events that I'm doing. And if I'm in your area, come out and meet me and ask me your questions. I'd love to get a chance to meet you and answer any questions you have. And again, Donnie, Britt, thanks for having me on the show and sharing my cringe story with everyone. And I'd like to thank the great state of Utah, that is where I know everyone watching this is from, for participating in this as well. Thank you.
Well, if you do manage to catch Spike in person, whatever you do, make sure you do not challenge him to an axe throwing competition because you will probably
I
get
will beat you.
washed. So
I will
yeah.
I will hurt your feelings if I
Well,
am
and that's a scary thing
apparently
to hear
really
from someone
good at
holding an
throwing it.
axe.
Yeah, I'm like really good at throwing axes. I've never, only in the last year have I even started throwing axes. It's something I'm apparently very good at, and I
Yeah.
it's one of my things. I'm not good at sports. In general, I'm not good at sports. I'm not like a great at basketball or baseball or any of that. Axe throwing, apparently like the prototypical axe thrower.
It's the saying about, the world's best, computer science could have been born in like 500 BC and we'll never know. I think
I'm the reverse of
the
that.
world's greatest axe thrower.
World's greatest
Yeah.
axe thrower does me essentially no good other than to be able to brag that I'm good at axe throwing.
Spike could have been the most powerful Viking, but alas, we'll never know for
Never
sure.
know.
Thanks again for coming on, and thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. Again, make sure to check us out at cringepost.com. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. We love to see it, and we'll see you on the next one.